guys, thanks for visiting my channel. Today we are going to be making apple pie. I asked and you responded with a resounding yes please, let's do apple pie. So that is what we're going to do today. I thought for sure apple pie may have been something that was overdone and not something you were interested in, but when I asked, you guys said that that's what you wanted. So that's what we are going to do. Now today's video, I want to make it kind of comprehensive and cover a lot of questions that you asked, so I'll do my best to keep it as brief as possible, but I do want to try to answer a lot of the questions that I got about pie. And one of the biggest concerns with people is crust, so we're going to really talk a lot about crust and then certainly your filling. So let's start with the apple. Now you want to make sure that whatever apple or apples you choose to put in your filling, you want to make sure that they are an apple that will bake well. You want something that will hold its shape so you don't have a mealy textured pie. You want a pie that you can actually see the apple slices after it's been cooked. So today we're going to be using two of my favorites. We're going to use Honeycrisp, which is my very favorite. Honeycrisps are wonderful for just about any application. They're delicious to just eat raw. They're great for applesauce. They're great for baking. They're just a great all-around apple. So we're going to be using them today. And then the other one I chose is Ginger Gold. And I talked about this and used this in my apple sauce video. They have a little bit of a spicy kind of flavor to them. That's the ginger name. And they're just a really nice apple. They hold their shape well. They're nice and have a nice crisp texture to them if you just want to eat them raw, and I really enjoy them. So these two together are great. But as I spoke of in my applesauce video, whenever you're baking something with apple in it, if you use more than one variety of apple, it gives you more depth of flavor. So I'm going to be using two. You could choose to use 3 or 4 varieties of apples. It's entirely up to you. Just make sure that whatever apples you choose, like I said, are really good for baking. And we're going to need about 8 cups of sliced apples, which is approximately 3 1/4 pounds or so. And then of course we're going to use our secret ingredient, boiled cider, to ramp up the flavor just a little bit. The other thing that you could use to give your apple pie filling a little more flavor is spiced rum or rum extract. I'm not going to use that today. I'm just going to stick with the boiled cider because I really like that, and I think most of you will like that as well. So I'm not going to add anything else, but I will put in the description box some other options for adding flavor to your apple pie so we can get the ultimate apple pie, right? And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about before we get started is crust. Now for today's video, I am going to be making Never Fail Pie Crust that will make 4 single crusts or 2 double pie crusts. And one of the reasons I'm going to do that is because I really enjoy the recipe. It's really easy to use for those of you who are struggling with pie crust. It's a wonderful recipe because it's really easy to work with and pretty foolproof. Thus the name Never Fail Pie Crust. And I did notice that as I've done some research on pie crust that there are different variations of Never Fail Pie Crust. So you do have options that way, but I'm going to share with you my favorite one. But my main focus and my main reason for doing that today is because I know many of you are empty nesters, and a lot of times when I post videos you are asking me how to cut down the recipe or how to make it in a smaller amount because it's just you and your spouse. Instead of making 1 large pie, I'm going to make 3 small pies, and then I'll show you how I freeze it. The other reason why I wanted to do 3 smaller pies is because I had one of you, looking at you, Mr. Ken, who I know he was joking. He said, when I asked if there was anyone who was interested in apple pie, he said, of course I'm interested in apple pie, and I want to see a side-by-side of Dutch apple, regular apple, and apple crisp. So we're not going to do apple crisp, but we are going to do a side-by-side of regular apple pie and a Dutch apple pie topping. I wanted one that made enough that I could show you different options. I'm going to show you how you can put the pie together and freeze it, and then we're going to do a Dutch apple topping, and then we're going to do a lattice crust. And then the other thing I wanted to mention before we get started is you guys know how much I love King Arthur flour. Well, on their website until the 31st of January, I believe, this beautiful pie plate is on sale. It's $15 off. It's Emile Henry, if I'm saying that right, is the brand, and it is made from burgundy clay, so it bakes really evenly and it makes an absolutely beautiful pie. I've been loving this since I purchased it. I've had it for about a month and I absolutely love this pie plate. So if you're looking for a new pie plate, go to the King Arthur website, and they're offering a discount on this pie plate until the 31st of January. And no, I'm not being sponsored by King Arthur. I just really enjoy their website and their products. So without further ado, we're gonna get started on the crust. Okay guys, here we go. I brought you in close so hopefully you can see a little bit better, and maybe for those of you who are struggling with pie crust, it'll make a little more sense to you. You want just about everything to be cold. So I put my butter, we're gonna use a combination of butter and shortening. I like that combination. Shortening will give you a really flaky crust. Butter helps to give you flavor. But in my experience, I know that there's lots of different ways to make pie crust out there, and I guess you should experiment to determine what is your favorite way to make it, or the favorite texture and flavor that you like. But I like more shortening than butter. To me, yes, I like the butter for the flavor, and it does add a little bit as far as flakiness, but not nearly as much as shortening does. Shortening pie crust is way flakier, in my opinion, than a butter crust. And butter crust can tend to be a little bit heavy, and especially if it's a pie that you're going to refrigerate, I think the crust gets too hard, and I don't like that. So I use more shortening than butter, but I do like to use a little bit of butter for flavor. So for about 30 minutes before I get started, I put both my shortening and my butter in the freezer. And then we have a half a cup of cold water. But let's start with the dry ingredients first. So first you're going to take 4 cups of flour, and I do the fluff and scoop method. You could scoop with a spoon and then level it off. But I have found that fluffing it and then scooping it with your measuring cup works well. You just don't want to ever pack it down for baking. You don't ever want to pack down your flour. All right, so there's our 4 cups of flour. And to that, we are going to add a tablespoon of sugar. And then we're going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I just kind of eyeball it in the palm of my hand. If you want to be exact, you can measure. But I want about 1.5 teaspoons of table salt. And then what we're going to do is you're going to take a fork and you're just going to whisk that all together. Okay, now we're going to add our fat. At this point, you don't need to worry about over mixing it. Over mixing it is what will cause your crust to be tough, but you don't have to worry about that till you add your liquid. So right now we are going to add our shortening, and for the shortening, all I do is kind of cut it in big chunks. And we want 1.25 cups of shortening. I love using the sticks. It just makes it a lot easier. And then like I said, I put my butter in the freezer. And then what I like to do with the butter, and we're going to use 1/2 cup of butter, is I take my frozen stick of butter and I'm going to grate it. I find that this just helps you to get it better distributed throughout your flour. And then we're just going to add that to our flour. And then at this point, we want to incorporate our fat into our flour. And I don't think anything works any better than your 2 hands. You're welcome to use a pastry cutter if you prefer, but I prefer my hands. So I just go in with my hands, and you want to start distributing it throughout your flour. We want it to be pretty even. You want to start breaking up your shortening. And we're looking for our fat to be about the size of peas mixed in with our flour. You don't want to break it up completely. You do want it to be a little bit chunky, and you want those chunks to be about the size of a pea. Okay, you can see the fat in there is about the size of peas. I hope you can see that okay. Okay, so now we are going to add our liquid. And then this is where you want to be careful how much you mix it, because if you overmix it, it will be tough, and we don't want that. So we're going to take a half a cup of water. And to that, we are going to add a tablespoon of vinegar. Now, in Never Fail Pie Crust, it usually calls for white vinegar, but since we're doing an apple pie, we're going to jazz it up and use our apple cider vinegar. So we're going to use 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. We're going to add that to our water, and then we are going to add 1 large egg. I know egg is not typically, most recipes do not call for an egg. It's only in the Never Fail Pie Crust versions, but I'm telling you, it works beautifully. And the vinegar helps with the flakiness of your crust. Some people use vodka. I've not tried that recipe. I have to confess, I've not tried that. But I do know that the vinegar does make for a more flaky, tender crust. So we're going to pour all that in, and then this is where we want to mix carefully. You don't want to be aggressive mixing here. You just want to gently mix. And we want it should start coming together. Now you can have times where it is too dry and you may have to add some more very cold water. You want to make sure your water is nice and cold. But we're going to mix this around a little bit until it starts to come together. And I kind of do a folding motion, kind of go under and over. And then when you get to the point that it looks like most of it is wet, you want to pick up some of it and see if it's holding together, and you can kind of tell by the feel of it if it is too dry. See how it still kind of wants to break apart and not necessarily hold together? I need a few more tablespoons of water. And I recommend just adding a tablespoon at a time. But I know just from experience, I'm going to need at least 2 more tablespoons. So I'm going to add 2 tablespoons here. We're going to gently mix that in. You don't want your pie dough to be too wet, but you don't want it to be dry either. Either way, it's a problem. So part of it is just experience and practice. So we're going to try again, and I can tell that this feels heavier, it feels more moist, and see how it holds together and wants to fall apart less. That's what we're looking for. What we want to do now is we want to turn it out onto our surface, and we're going to make 4 balls out of it. And then I'm going to wrap each dough ball, and we're going to put it in the refrigerator. We want it to rest, and we want it to get cold again. So you want to put it in your refrigerator for about 30 minutes. So we're going to turn it out. And then we're going to bring it together. Over a little bit. There, you can see better. And see how it's all coming together? You don't want to knead it here, and you don't want to mess with it too much. You just want to bring it together. And then we're going to divide it into 4ths. Okay, now we're going to take each disc and we're going to wrap it in saran wrap. Okay, now into the fridge our pie dough discs are going to go for about 30 minutes. Now, at this point, if you were just making one pie, the 1 9-inch pie, you could put the other two in the freezer. And what I would do is I wrap them in saran wrap, and then I also put them in a freezer bag and date them, and then I would freeze them. But we're gonna use them all today so that I can show you all three things I wanted to show you with the pie: the Dutch apple, the lattice, and how to freeze one. Okay guys, I tidied up and now we are ready to start chopping our apples or slicing our apples. So what I'm gonna do is, to keep my apples from browning while I'm working with them, we want 8 cups of flour. So I'm just using my big measuring cup because it'll let me know when I'm getting to about 8 cups. And then I just filled it halfway with water, and I'm gonna add about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And that will just keep them from oxidizing as I'm cutting them. So like I did with my applesauce, I'm just gonna take my peeler, and you can do whatever works for you, but I'm just gonna use my vegetable peeler to take off the peeling. And I'm going to cut it in half, quarter it actually, I'm gonna quarter it. And then we're going to take out the core, like we did when we made applesauce. And then I'm just gonna do slices. About that thick. And then I'm gonna put them in my water. Okay guys, I think I have you in close enough that you can see pretty well. We're going to start to assemble our filling. And I just wanted to show you, I still have my lemon water in here, but if you push down your apples, I have about 8 cups of apples, and that's what you want. But we don't want all that liquid, so we need to drain our apples. So and the first thing we're gonna do, you might wanna taste your apples to see how tart your apples are and how sweet you want your filling. I'm gonna use about 3/4 of a cup of sugar. You want it sweet enough, but not too sweet, and that's something else to keep in mind when you're selecting an apple. If you like a really tart apple pie, you're gonna wanna select apples like Granny Smith. This combination gives you kind of a sweet tart flavor, and then there are apples you could choose if you like a really sweet pie. So anyway, I'm going to use about 3/4 of a cup of sugar, and then we're going to add our seasonings. We are going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon, and you can use whatever seasonings, whatever spices you like. I'm going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then I'm going to use 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg and 1/4 of a teaspoon of allspice. You could also use some ginger in here if you like, or you could use apple pie spice. That's entirely up to you, but this works pretty well for me. And then we are going to use as our thickener, I'm going to use a combination of instant clear gel, and I purchased mine from King Arthur Flour's website, but you can also get it on Amazon. I have not seen it in any grocery store, but you can check. I like the combination of clear gel and flour, but I will also include amounts for straight up flour or straight up cornstarch. Measure. I want 2 tablespoons of clear gel. I'm going to use equal parts clear gel and flour. 2 tablespoons of clear gel, and then 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. And then I'm just going to give that a little bit of a mix. And then I'm going to sprinkle that over my apples. And we're going to give that a good stir and coat everything and get everything well combined. You could, if you wanted to, you could mix all of the dry stuff together first. You could do your clear gel, your flour, or your cornstarch and your spices, mix those together, then pour them over, but this works fine for me. Okay, and now we're gonna amp up the flavor just a little more, and you knew that's where I was going. Boiled cider. we are going to add about 1/4 cup. You can use more or less depending on what flavor, how much flavor you want to add, but this stuff is pretty potent, so I'm going to do about 1/4 cup. And then I'm also going to add about 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. My homemade vanilla extract. You might want to give that a try if you haven't yet. And then we're also going to add 2 tablespoons of melted butter. Now, I did mention earlier, at this point you could also add some rum extract or a couple of tablespoons of spiced rum. Okay guys, you still with me? Apple pie is definitely a labor of love, right? Okay, so now we have our filling made, our pie dough has chilled and rested, so now we're ready to assemble. So what we're gonna do is we are going to take a little bit of flour and sprinkle our surface, and also some on our rolling pin. And then we're gonna take one of our discs. Now, if you were doing a full-size pie, you'd use the whole thing. Mine's smaller, so I'm gonna cut mine or reduce mine a little bit. Just gonna set it down, and I twirl it like this to make sure that it's not gonna stick. And then I flip it over and I do the same thing. Kind of mash it down a little bit. Make sure my rolling pin has plenty of flour on it, and then you're just going to apply gentle pressure and gently roll out your dough. And then when I get it started, you want to make sure it's not sticking. So, and mine is a little bit on the bottom, so I pick mine up and then I gently reflour my surface, put this back down. Sprinkle a little bit of flour on top. And it's okay if you lose little flakes of your dough, that's fine. We're gonna roll it out, and you wanna roll it out so that it's 2 inches or so, or an inch to 2 inches wider than your pan. And mine never comes out completely round. I've tried everything under the sun and it just doesn't. So just get it as round as you can, and then what I do is I just fold mine over, pick up my little pan, and place it in my pan. Now, I like crust, so I leave mine a little on the thicker side. If you want a thinner crust, roll it out to the thickness that you like. I'm going to pull off some of this, but I do like to leave enough on the edge because I like to fold it over and have a really nice, pretty edge. So now, I'm going to take my pie filling. I'm going to use my biggest one across the middle. Okay, there we go. Once you've figured out your over, under, and all that, then what I do is I take my pie crust and I twist everything up and around the edge because I like a crust on the edge. If you don't like all that crust, by all means, cut it off and just crimp it with a fork. Okay, so once I get everything flipped up, then I do my fluted edge and I just stick my finger down and press and make a pretty little ruffled edge. And there you go. Sprinkle that on top of our apples. You want to line your baking sheet with parchment because it is going to bake over the edge of the pan. As it starts to bubble and ooze, it's going to ooze a little bit, and it's going to make a mess in your pan, your cookie sheet, or in your oven if you don't use a cookie sheet. So I highly recommend using a parchment lined cookie sheet. Put all of our crumbles on top of there like that. That's pretty good. And then to finish off our lattice pie, and I failed to mention, you don't have to do a lattice. You can just do a straight up crust, and you would just roll it out so that it'll fit on the top of your pie, and then you just want to poke some vents in it with a sharp knife so that it vents. But either way, I would finish it off this way. Take a pastry brush, and you can use cream or you can use milk. I'm using milk today. You can even use water. You could even spritz it with water if you want. We want to give I'm going to use turbinado sugar or sugar in the raw, or you could use sparkling sugar. We're just going to make the crust pretty, and it'll have a little bit of an extra crunch to it. So just sprinkle that on. And then I'm using the turbinado sugar. You just want to use a coarse sugar. And then I'm just going to give it a little sprinkle with that, just to make it pretty, add a little more depth of flavor, and we're good to go. So these are going to go into a preheated 425-degree oven for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to reduce the heat to 350 and bake them off until they're nice and golden brown and the filling is all bubbly. Whew. Are you still with me? Yes, I said it before, baking apple pie is a labor of love, but it is certainly worth the effort. So don't be discouraged by all the steps. And actually it goes faster when you're not doing what I'm doing, which is talking and explaining everything. So the one thing that I wanted to talk about is while our pies are baking, is I wanted to talk about how to preserve the last guy. And this is why I like making the larger batch of dough and making a large batch of pie, because it's just my husband and I most of the time now. We're pretty much empty nesters, so we don't need a huge pie. So that's why I did the smaller ones, and this is what I do to preserve my extra. So I would have 2 extra, or I would take them to my kids if we didn't want to eat them. Anyway, what I would do is I would cover it with foil. You want to loosely cover it. You don't want to mess up your beautiful handiwork. And this also works with Dutch apple. I've done it with Dutch apple, and it's beautiful. And actually, if you have kids in college and you want to be their hero and they have a place to bake off of pie, this is a great little treat to take to them. Anyway, so I lightly cover it in foil, and then I will put it in the freezer until it's fully frozen. And then I take a freezer bag and write the date on it that it's apple pie and instructions on how to cook it, and I will leave that in the description section below. There's different schools of thought out there on cooking frozen pies. Some people say to defrost them in your refrigerator overnight. Some people say you can just go ahead and pop them in the oven. I have my own school of thought, and I will leave it in the description section for you on how to bake off a frozen pie so that it turns out good. And anyway, I would just leave the instructions on here, and then we can have another pie later on if we want it, take it to our kiddos and drop them off and be the hero. Or you just never know when company will show up to your, I don't want that in there yet. When company will show up and you need a dessert on the fly, they're just really nice to have in your freezer, especially if you don't need a full pie all at once and you want to use this recipe. So, okay guys, it's been 15 minutes. I turned my oven down. I misspoke. It's not 350, it is 375. I apologize. I'm having a lot of distractions today, so I'm having a hard time concentrating, but it should be 375, not 350. So I've turned my oven down to 350. If you're doing a full-size pie, it's going to take another 35-40 minutes. For my little guys, it's probably only going to take another 25 or so. Just keep an eye on it. You want your crust to be nice and golden brown, and you want it to be golden brown on top as well, and you want your filling to be bubbling. So that's what you're going to be looking for. I also wanted to mention that you want to put your pie on the bottom shelf of your oven. If your oven is quirky and you know that and you think it should be someplace else, that's fine. But I always bake mine on the bottom, or the bottom of my pie crust does not get done. and then the top is overdone. So I always put mine on the bottom. And then a couple of troubleshooting things for your pie crust. If you are using butter and you take it out of the refrigerator and you're having a hard time rolling it, if it wants to break apart instead of rolling out smooth, just let it sit a little bit longer and warm up just a bit more. That's the problem with butter. It can be a little tricky to work with when it's super cold. So try that. If your crust is crumbly, that means you probably did not use enough water. And what you can do to try to salvage that is you can take a spray bottle and spritz it a little bit and get it to hold together, and then try to roll it out again. So those are two ways to troubleshoot. And the other thing I wanted to mention is about your rolling pin. Don't ever wash your rolling pin. When you wash them, it's guaranteed you're going to have trouble rolling out, especially pie crust. It just, things want to stick to it. So what I do each time, I don't run it under water, I don't wash it in any way, I just take a clean paper towel and get all of the residue off, and then I store it. And this is a mat. You're supposed to use it for rolling out pie dough. I think it's a pain and it's not helpful to me, but it makes a great place to store my rolling pin and keep it nice and clean. So if you don't have a mat, you can just wrap it in a paper towel and store it in one of your cabinets. You just want it to stay in a nice dry place, but don't ever wash it because things are guaranteed to stick if you do that. Okay guys, I just wanted to bring you in close and let you take a look at what's going on in my oven. See how everything is getting golden brown, and see the bubbling and the oozing, especially here over here on the left side of the Dutch apple one. That's what we're looking for. And I think our lattice one is almost done as well. So we are pretty good to go, but that's what you want to look for, the golden brown color and the oozing, and that means our pies are done. Okay, they are out of the oven. Mr. Ken, this is for you. Here's your side-by-side comparison of the Dutch apple. Look at that beautiful golden brown topping. And then our traditional apple pie with a lattice crust. Okay guys, we're back. Our pies have been sitting for a little over an hour. They really should be more cool than that when you cut them, but I'm trying to wrap up my video here, so I'm going to cut one open for you. I just wanted to say that for those of you who are really struggling with crust, I would start with using all shortening. I wouldn't put any butter in until you really get the hang of it using all shortening. Shortening is so much more user-friendly in my opinion when you are struggling with crust. And then as you start to master that, then I would start incorporating some butter into your recipe. Substitute some part of the butter, part of the shortening with butter to give you a little extra flavor, a little extra pizzazz if you want to, but there's nothing wrong with a all shortening crust. I also, speaking of that, I wanted to mention that I do not use the butter flavored shortening. I'm not a fan of that. It's an artificial butter flavor and I just don't care for it. So I don't use that. I know there are people who do and enjoy it. So pie crust, finding something, a recipe that you like, just takes a little bit of practice and experimentation. So what I like, you may not. So, and there are a million different recipes out there, but I've found that this one that I showed you today is tried and true. And if you substitute, if you use all shortening and no butter, I'm sure you will get really terrific results and you'll have an easier time making your crust. Now, I'm also going to include another recipe for you in the description box that will make one pie, one double crust pie. And that, doesn't have the egg in it, but it's still fairly user-friendly. So you can give that one a try as well if you want to make a smaller batch of pie crust. But like I said, there are many, many advantages to making the larger batch, and you can always freeze it, and then you'll just have it on hand and you don't have to make it every time you need it. So without further ado, let's cut one of these bad boys open. I think I'm going to cut open the lattice crust, but I wanted to show you, see how beautiful that pie is. Oh, so pretty. And it's flaky, so good. So he is going to ooze a little bit because he's still a little bit warm. but that's okay. But look how flaky. You can see it, it flakes just as I'm cutting it. And these little pie pans are just fabulous when you just want a little pie, if there's just 2 of you. If you want to make your pie ahead of time, it's totally fine to make it the day before. It'll be delicious the next day and be perfectly set up. There we go. Well, it's set up better than I thought it would be, for as warm as it still is. Give you a look at that. See how beautiful that is? It smells amazing, so good. But look how flaky that crust is. Perfection. So good. The boiled cider, you guys, and the vanilla in that is amazing. It really amps up the apple flavor when you use the boiled cider. But I'll show you again just how flaky and tender that crust is. Amazing. So good. And it was really easy. Really easy to do. So, don't give up on making pie crust. You can do it. It just takes some practice. And you need to do it on a day when you don't have a million interruptions. I had a lot of interruptions today, so it was kind of hard to do this video, but I hope that this video was helpful to you. So if you have questions or concerns about making pie crust, please feel free to contact me. If there's something that is confusing or something that I didn't cover well, contact me and let me know. I am happy to help. And I hope you will give this apple pie recipe a try. Thanks so much for coming along with me today. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.